Let's debate this with our panel. In London, we have Gina Vale, who's a research fellow at King's College at London's International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation, specialising in minors affiliated with Daesh. And we also have Harris Quinney, who's the chairman of the conservative think tank, the Bow Group. I thank you both for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Ben, let me start with you. There's a conundrum for European countries. They don't know what to do with those deemed kids under the age of 18 who are European citizens who were involved with ISIS or Daesh. Should there be a conundrum, or should they just take them back and try and fix them and try and reintegrate them into society?
No, I think it's a very complex issue, as you say. You've got two kinds of minors that may have been involved in ISIS. Those that went out of their own volition to join up with ISIS, and those that were taken out by their parents. I think when it comes to those that went out of their own volition, my view is the same as an adult who went out there, that the United Kingdom should be actively seeking to prevent their re-entry into the UK. For those that went out under their parents' guidance, I think that is a slightly different case. Some of them, in fact, I understand many hundreds were actually born in ISIS territory. And so there's a question of where their citizenship rests, whether their citizenship rests in their country of birth or whether it is tied to their parentage, which of course brings the United Kingdom into the question. And my feeling is that those people should be able to apply, at least for UK citizenship, and be considered and be assessed by the security services, but also be considered to be allowed back into the United Kingdom, as really they were innocents in the process.
So Gina, Ben's making a distinction here. He's saying there's two types of kids you're dealing with. Do you make that distinction as well? And is Ben looking at it in the correct way?
From the research I and my organisation have done, we see that it's useful to subcategorize minors. So age group is one way that we can do this, and this is in line with the circumstances of them joining the group, as well as the roles that they have undertaken. So as Ben has said, there is a difference between those who joined willingly and those that were accompanied with their parents. For us, we see this from the point of view of looking at reports of minors who have travelled. The minimum age of those going unaccompanied and travelling on their own without a parent or a guardian is about 15. So we see teenagers as a separate category and the minors under that. As Ben also mentioned, we have another category of infants, those that have been born inside Islamic State territory. And my colleagues and I have counted about 730, and that's just from available data on this. It's very difficult to try and create policies on something which is such an individualized phenomenon. We cannot use broad brush responses for a 4-year-old the same as we can for a 16-year-old. And this is where we need to understand the individual circumstances surrounding minors and adults, exactly the same, how and why they have joined the group, what their roles were within that group, and then also the circumstances of their dissociation, whether, again, that was voluntary or whether that was through interception of potentially Iraqi forces or others. So again, there is nuance needed across these different stages.
Yeah, it is complicated. Let's bring in Tasnime Akunjee, who joins us now from London. He's a lawyer working in the field of terrorism. So, Tasnime, we heard from the other two saying, well, you have to kind of pass this out and separate it out. There's a difference between, as we heard, a 4-year-old who was just sort of born in Raqqa during the height of all this trouble to European parents, and somebody who might be 16 and might have used a weapon, might have killed people on behalf of Daesh and might actually be brainwashed. Do you see it in the same way?
Well, if the question is, do we differentiate between children and create a special category for some children as opposed to others, and by that creation of a subcategory, do we deny some children help and their rights, then I don't see a distinction between children. At the end of the day, the law in the UK anyway is that until you're a certain age, you can't vote, and anyone under that age you sort of can, and there's a broad brush approach to that because we categorize children as a generic special category. So the idea that we will say, well, we have one policy for babies, but we'll have another policy for 14-year-olds is an invention that doesn't exist really in the law in any other sphere. So it's a special category once again for people who are in a difficult situation.
Okay, so Ben, you have to take them both back, whether you like it or not, whether it was a 16-year-old who might have even beheaded someone and a 4-year-old who's not committed any crime. Both are children, and if they are European citizens, you bring them in and you try and fix it, just like, I don't know, kids with a drug problem who happen to be your citizens. You try and fix it. What do you think?
Well, I think that's not accurate in three ways. The first way is that in the United Kingdom, if a minor commits an extremely serious crime, that of a premeditated murder or some forms of child abuse, then often they are tried as an adult, despite being underage. The case that springs to mind is the James Bulger case, but there have been many where those under the age of 18 have not had their criminal records cleared at 18 due to the severity of their crimes. And I think beheading people in ISIS territory falls under that most serious category. The second is that once these people have left the United Kingdom and there is some debate over whether they should be allowed back in, there are two elements that come into play. One is an assessment by the Home Office as to whether these people should be granted access to the United Kingdom as migrants or asylum seekers, and one is an assessment by the security services as to whether these people pose a threat to other citizens in the United Kingdom. So I think all of those three tests need to be met before letting someone back into the UK. And so there is a bespoke method in that sense for assessing this, because whenever it comes to this level of severity, you know, the security services will be assessing each individual on a very specific and individual basis. And I think that's right, and I think that is what needs to happen when it falls under the category of these most severe crimes.
Tasnime Akunjee, you need a customized solution to a customized problem. You need the bespoke solution with people looking at it closely. What do you think?
Well, I roundly reject what Ben says, in that what he suggests, therefore, is that the UK government leaves some people stateless, children who are not citizens of any particular place, because of the difficulty around assessing them, or assessing that they've committed a criminal act. And if they are British citizens, then they ought to be tried under British justice, not left out in the field as stateless individuals. And that's what troubles me the most, the idea that we don't take responsibility for the issue of our own creation. So quite rightly, as Ben has said, that there are elements within the law which allow for blocking people coming into the UK who are not UK citizens on the basis that they are a threat to national security or the public good. And that's right and proper. They are other states' citizens, and we don't want other people's problems. But by the same fork, we can't then simply pass on our citizens, who are our responsibility, and force other people to take on the responsibility of them when they are probably the least equipped people to do so.
Gina, are both men right here?
I would agree in terms of needing to repatriate minors. First and foremost, we need to respond to this in adherence to international human rights law. We cannot leave stateless children stateless. If we look at the time period of Al-Qaeda in Iraq from about 2004 to 2009, the Iraqi government have actually stated that about 520 children were born stateless from that period. And they had about a quarter of the recorded fighters that we can account for at the moment, and that's just based on available data. So we're facing potential thousands of stateless minors, and this may be on account of unofficial marriage certificates or birth certificates that are not recognized by states. If we then exacerbate this issue by rejecting the acceptance of our own nationals, whether those be adults or minors, back into our own countries, then we are actually adding to the burden of the Iraqi and potentially the Syrian judicial and detention services, as well as rehabilitation support services that are available or potentially not available in these countries. And the only people that we are hurting in this process are ourselves and those children. if we continue down this route of rejecting or not, as we said, cleaning up the mess that we have created, then we're going to just end up continuing a cycle of violence that has international ramifications.
Right. Ben, let me ask you about the French. The French say no adult fighters, no women considered wives of fighters, but children, yes, we'll bring them in and we'll sort them out. Do the French have the capability to de-radicalize, to reintegrate these kids? And again, across that vast range of the almost 18-year-olds to almost toddlers or infants?
Well, I think that the French have all of the same problems and arguably more problems than other European countries when it comes to radicalisation. Of course, we're aware of the many terrorist atrocities that have occurred in France. But I think that something has been skipped over in terms of the assumption that these people are automatically British citizens. If they have gone to join another nation, much in the same way that if I applied for US citizenship, for example, and took US citizenship, the United Kingdom would not necessarily have to readmit me as a UK citizen. And there's also the question that has been raised of those people that were born in ISIS territory. They are not necessarily British citizens.
Okay, but let's say, for instance, sorry to interrupt you, let's say, for instance, you were 9 years old and your parents took you to Raqqa. You didn't really have much of a choice in that, did you?
No, well, that's exactly what I said at the beginning in terms of there must be differentiation between those that have gone out there of their own volition to fight and those that have been taken out there by their parents. I think all have to be considered by security services and the immigration authorities. But in those cases where someone has been taken along by their parents, not necessarily against their will, but without their will, then I think there is a reasonable case to be made that they should be readmitted into the United Kingdom, but certainly should be under the review of both the Home Office in terms of immigration and the security services in terms of any threat they pose, because the most important thing is the first duty of government, and of course the first duty of the security services is to ensure the safety of the majority of British citizens. And we can't be impeding the safety of the majority of British citizens for these minority cases of those people that have been either born in ISIS territory or have gone out of their own volition to fight for ISIS.
Tasnime Akunjee, extending that question that I asked Ben, do you think the British have the capability of reintegrating and rehabilitating a lot of these kids of varying experiences? Some of them been through hell, some of them might have done terrible things.
So one of the things I want to take you up on is the idea that these children had went and gone to another state where they've taken up statehood. Well, if they've gone to ISIS or Al-Qaeda controlled territory, neither ISIS nor Al-Qaeda were ever considered a legitimate state by any other nation. I don't understand where he gets the idea that these people have citizenship somewhere else. Where is that other place that they have citizenship in, unless he's suggesting it's Syria somehow through ISIS or Al-Qaeda fissured them. So it's a bit of a nonsense argument, frankly. Does the UK have the ability to rehabilitate people? I would imagine that these children have extended families, the vast majority of whom would have no sympathy whatsoever with the causes that are purported that these children had taken up abroad. So I would imagine that their families and extended families, much of whom pick up the burden of these children anyway in a de facto situation with how the UK deals with it currently, and they're the ones that give them love and affection and reintegrate them into society. There's a very, very small minority of people who have gone out to Syria for a particularly unpleasant activity or cause, and most of the family members of those individuals, the vast majority, will be very much against them. So I don't see why certain people are thinking that the state is going to pick up the burden of rehabilitating kids. The state is particularly bad at rehabilitating children, even normal children outside of this extreme context. But families are there for these kids in most cases, and so the burden falls on them, and usually they'll achieve that quite well. Children are very resilient to reorientation.
Okay, Ben, Gina and Tasneem, I've got to move on. But listen, it's a fascinating topic. There's no clear answers, and it is a complicated issue here. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do after, especially, Daesh lost most of its territory. And I think it's been fascinating talking to all of you. Hope to have you all back on the Newsmakers again in the not too distant future. Thanks again.